Welcome to episode 9 of the Dr. Stephen Greer podcast. We are joined by Michael Herrera, who we may remember from Dr. Greer's 2023 Disclosure Project anniversary event, where he first came forward in Washington, D.C. with an explosive story from 2009. Dr. Greer, it's great to be with you today.
Good to see you. Thanks for doing it. And Michael Herrera, thank you for taking your time to do this today. So, Mr. Herrera, why don't you tell us just really briefly what happened for people who haven't heard this account in 2009 when you were a Marine on a humanitarian mission to Indonesia.
Correct. So this again happened in 2009. I was called, at least with my team, to respond to a natural disaster. So originally the humanitarian mission was set in the Philippines, and my ship, which was the USS Denver, was rerouted to actually go onto the far western side of Padang or Sumatra, which is the western part of Indonesia. We then got a briefing that we were going to go basically secure a LZ or a landing zone, which was hastily done. We end up getting onto the bird, we're going to the objective. We disembarked the helicopter, made it on top of the hill, and when we looked at the hill and saw over the hill, there was this thing just sitting there, and it was rotating. It was changing colors, and it was like a light matte gray to like a dark matte black. You could tell it was constructed. It wasn't like a seamless object, for example. You could see the paneling and the fact it was rotating. When we decide to basically go down this hill is when a clearing started to open up, and we were in a tactical column, at least all 6 of us, and we were intercepted as soon as we could see this thing in its entirety. We were intercepted by a team of 8 operators who weren't wearing any kind of military rank insignia or military branch, anything that could be identifiable. They were wearing a bunch of black gear. They had weapons similar to ours, but newer. They had some ACOGs. They had some PEC-16s, things like that. And they were kind of in a position to where they had interlocking fields of fire. So it basically take them nothing to basically smoke us. And as that was going on, we're seeing this craft in the background with this platform. Now, when they came up to us, they were standoff distance. They had their muzzles on us, and 2 of them began to basically search us one by one, stripped us of our weapons, of course, to make sure that we weren't chambering any rounds, and effectively disarming all of us so that way we weren't a risk. At the same time, they had a guy that was going around taking our military IDs out of our pockets and scanning them with this device. It was like a biometrics tracking system or something that was called BATS that we have had access to, and we were training on it, but it was something a little bit more high tech. That wasn't working well for them, so they had something that was like a modern day cell phone. It was like a CAVCOM system that they were taking pictures of our IDs. They were threatening us the whole time. They were telling that they could kill us. They were kind of roughing us up in the process. And as this is going on, we're also paying attention to these guys. We're also seeing what's going on in the background. And in the background, there's some trucks that are coming up. 4 trucks, could be F-350s, it could be Tundras. They didn't have any kind of logos on them either, but they were blacked out. And they were pulling these trailers that had these containers, which were almost like a shipping container, but had a HVAC system on the top part of it, kind of closer to the front. And 4 of these trucks are basically loading onto this platform to basically take these containers and load them up there. When I had first came forward, my story had basically was about drug running, because that's what I had hypothesized. I know Dr. Greer has heard this in accounts like this very extensively through the time he's been doing this for 30 years. So that's what I thought it initially was, until I met Jake Barber, who says that it wasn't drugs, it was people that they had in these containers that they were basically recruiting into a psionic program for these black programs, which is a P3, which is psionic predisposition potential, is what that stands for. Or it could be psionic psionic potential predispositions the other way too. So you guys will kind of see it both ways. Mm-hmm. But essentially what that is they're picking up people from disaster zones and allowing them to basically, if they have these skill sets and they're able to do that, that they get plucked into these programs where they're given money, they participate, they do what they're supposed to be doing, of course, which is what Dr. Greer and I found out was using them on some of these testing sites to basically call in craft, and then they were being targeted and shot down with longitudinal weapons that were made from scalar technologies, right? So faster than the speed of light, that was taking these craft down, and that's when Jake's team would basically go recover the vehicles with the occupants in them and take them to a secured location.
Right, and those were extraterrestrial vehicles or non-human.
Yes.
You know, one of the interesting things about that is we can, you know, show the schematic. You know, didn't you say you thought that was about 300 feet across, that craft?
Yeah, 300 feet is what I estimate, you know, and it was pretty big. I've never seen anything that big that can move just like that. I mean, it was silent. It didn't make any noise, didn't break any sound barriers. It didn't disturb the vegetation. It was very creepy. And as far as the construction, you could tell it was man-made.
Right.
It had paneling on it. It had things that was like constructed out of an aerospace program. I mean, you can tell that it wasn't like a one solid piece. It just looked very abstract, but it looked something that was basically like a what you would see in a classified program.
Right. And why don't you describe also how you guys saw it take off and the speed of it?
Right. So they were kind of close to getting wrapped up on searching us. And I only counted 4 trucks that were basically coming up and going onto that platform with these containers on them. And as soon as the last truck, basically, I don't know where the trucks went. I don't think they stayed on that platform. They could have driven off on the other side, because I don't remember seeing the trucks on that platform. But we all of a sudden something caught my eye in the background, and the platform that they were driving onto levitated off the ground. It met the craft halfway, became to one solid piece. Then it moved up past the tree lines. As soon as it moved past the tree line, it shot over to the left towards the ocean, you know, thousands of miles per hour instantaneously without any kind of, you know, rotor wash, exhaust wash, nothing to disturb the trees or the coconuts, no sound barrier broken, you know, with a sonic boom. There was nothing that this thing could essentially elicit that it was there besides seeing it visually. You couldn't hear it. You know, it was weightless, even though it was sitting there hovering. It just seemed like it was weightless, even though it was set in stone, if that makes sense.
Yep. And this craft is a more modern version, let's say. If you look at our archive, the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, epiarchive.com, you can go and look at this. There's something was initially called the ARV, Alien Reproduction Vehicle, from the late 50s, early 60s. And there were 3 of them seen in a hangar at an air show in California at Norton Air Force Base, which is now closed. And there was, excuse me, there was the little one that was about 25, 30 feet across. There was one that was about 50 feet wide and one about 100 feet. So the one you saw would have been 3 times the largest one. But interestingly, the man that had been inside that craft at the air show, Brad Sorensen, in an interview we have that he did with an aerospace journalist that never got published, but we have the whole transcript. He described the interior components, same era as the Mercury space program, meaning the late 50s, early 1960s. So now fast forward to 2009, you see this craft. It's also man-made, and you know, very likely made by the Lockheed Skunk Works. Could be EG&G or you know, Northrop Grumman, but most of the ones that are cylindrical, circular, tend to be the Lockheed Skunk Works. And by the way, you know, you're the only person I've ever heard about who's been that close to a mission like that, where they're trafficking in people or drugs that have not been killed. Because, and I have researched a number of these cases, and when you given a lecture at University of Colorado Boulder, I think at the law school, and you had come up to me and gave me your card some years ago, but or I gave you mine, I can't remember. And you know what I always remind people of is that event initially, only because Jake Barber, who had operated at a facility where they were using these human captives / recruits to be the P3 operators, he immediately recognized them as that. and because he has been read in the programs where that's been done. And many times it's a bit of a predatory program where they'll go to a disaster area. I just want to connect the dot here, or an area that's war torn, and they'll tell people, well, you're going to die here anyway, but you can come with us and you'll be in this program. What's left out of that narrative is, and this has been shared with us by people on that team that are still alive and operational, is that a large number of those men, women, children that are recruited end up dying when they're put into the program, where they're put on a lot of drugs and a lot of electromagnetic systems to try to augment their remote viewing and telepathic capabilities. A very significant number of them go into comas or end up dying. Now, the ones who don't even pass muster for that end up working in these underground facilities and covert facilities. And of course, they'll make the point they're well taken care of, but to me, that's beside the point. This is clearly exploitive and human trafficking being done under the aegis of national security, and also a very inhumane program just because of the brutality of the training of these P3 operators. So now I think what we want to, I know there's a lot to unpack, you need to go soon, but what happened when you got back on your ship? Wasn't there, you went through a bunch of intimidation, right?
So it wasn't on the ship. So what ended up happening is we ended up going to Subic Bay, that was in the Philippines, to basically reattach back to the 7th Fleet.
Okay.
And first night of Liberty, we ended up going out into town, and we had to report back, I think, at 10 o'clock of the ship in order to have a head count, and then basically go to sleep and then wake up and go do the same thing again. That first night I got back, I had my camera secured in my locker. I had a Panasonic camera. I know a lot of people have heard the story, where I had it in my dump pouch and they never checked my dump pouch because it wasn't a big camera. It wasn't bulky. It was pretty slim, and it was a Panasonic one, and it didn't stick or make any kind of impression in my dump pouch. So when I had gotten back, I was like, okay, nobody knows that I had this except for us on top of the hill, which is where I snuck some pictures and took some video of this thing before we decided to go down. And I got back that night. My camera was on my rack. The memory card was pulled out of it, and the battery was pulled out of it. And this was secured in my locker, by the way, which my lock was untouched. All the other guys that were with me had all their phones taken. So they had those taken out of their stuff. And when we got back to Japan, it had been a month after that ordeal that happened. I got called up to the CP, which is a command post, and there was nobody there. And there was a gentleman there that was an Air Force officer, as a lieutenant colonel. He didn't have a name tag on his dress blues, which is a requirement for people in the Air Force. You must have a name tag. It's a part of your uniform regulation. He didn't have that. So I had given him a proper greeting of the day, rendered a salute, and then he had pulled me into an office and basically sat me down and slid me a piece of paper that basically says, you're going to sign this. And the only things I can see, that I can recall seeing on that was TSSCI, and it had Indonesia. Those are the only two things I can recount. They told I needed to put my social on there. I put my first, middle, and last name. And basically he said, if I talk about this, I can go to prison or I could be executed for treason, things like that. So I don't remember specifically what he said, but he said that basically along the lines that we would either go to prison or be killed. And that's
right.
That's
and that, by
happened.
the way, that I want to point out, this is a typical story. I guess the other 5 people in your platoon who are Marines had to do the same thing.
Yes, they did. Yep.
So a couple points here. First of all, that whole operation was an illegal black program. Having dealt with people in the presidency and the Congress and senior people at the Pentagon, I can assure folks that they have no idea that these craft exist and they're being used in these horrific fashion, such as these kidnappings and human trafficking and experimentation of humans. The other point I want to make is because those programs are illegal and unconstitutional, they're using the cover of national security to commit crimes. In a sense, it's worse than a civilian criminal network, because if you have the power of the national security and a top secret clearance to commit atrocities and crimes in the name of the United States or any other government, I view that abuse of power as another level of criminal culpability, even beyond the act itself, because it's a betrayal of the trust of the people and military folks like yourself who fall prey to that abuse of national security authorizations.
Well, and that's just it too. Is there have been a lot of people that have came forward on the back end of things talking about similar instances of not just military intervention, but the fact that humans have the possession of this kind of technology and have been reverse engineering it for years.
Right.
And that's the biggest secret, is they don't want people to know that. They would rather people think it's ET, because that's the easiest way to put the narrative together, as opposed to saying, yes, for the last 80 to 100 years we've had this technology. Then they have to explain why we have fossil fuels. Why are we still depending on stuff like that? Our medical technology could be further advanced compared to what is right now. And I know you know all about that too, with what you've seen several times.
Yeah, oh yeah. And let's pivot to what happened. Eventually we reconnected, brought you over to the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committee people, and you provided that information to them a couple years ago in 2023. And then they took you over to the Pentagon Aero office. And let's talk about that, because we're going to put in here the documentation you put together of what was shared with the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services guys that I've been working with, but also what you gave to the Aero office and Dr. Kirkpatrick. So why don't you go through that, and then what happened in terms of how that got covered up?
Okay. Yeah, so April timeframe, I end up 2023, I got a hold of you. And I still had your card. I had that in my wallet for years. I mean, because when you came down to Colorado, it was 2018. So up until that point, I'd watched your interview with Shawn Ryan and was like, okay, if they've got these provisions passed, they're going to help us, and this is the time to actually do it, because it needs to be told. It needed to be heard.
Right.
And that ended up basically sparking me to get in touch with you, and I end up sending you an email, and you said, I remember exactly who you are. Mm-hmm. And we end up having probably about an hour phone call going through the details of what I provided to the public. So you had arranged for me to show up in Washington, and got in touch with some people with Senate Intel that basically took me into a meeting with them in their skiff in their building on Capitol Hill, and I presented them the same testimony. So prior to that, we end up meeting up with everybody, gave them my testimony, and then we end up making the trip up to Aero office about 1 o'clock that day. And I gave Aero that testimony. And Dr. Kirkpatrick was interviewed everybody, was obviously in the skiff with me, and he's the only one that I can name without getting in trouble for that. But he is the one I think interviewed everybody, who's as the director, should have done the right thing, and would have done the right thing if he actually was not carrying water for people, which is what we end up finding out, right?
Right.
And so gave them my testimony. And then I came forward publicly in June with your 2-day event, and then the press club right after that, I think was on a Monday, which is when I came forward publicly, and everybody now know from that date on what I've been talking about. Well, Aero had to release their Volume 1 report to the public and to Congress and the Senate. And what they did was that everybody's testimony they went through, they spun it in the direction of saying extraterrestrial, spacecraft, and a bunch of other things in everybody's story. Now, for me, when I saw that put out, I had a lot of people reach out to me and said, you never said once that it was an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and you never said it was U.S. Special Forces, which is true.
Right.
They were a group of armed people who were American. They were American accents. They had American gear. Their tactics were pretty on par with special operations, but they were not special operations. They weren't SEALs. They weren't MARSOC. They weren't recon. They weren't anything like that. So when they decided to put the report and spin all of our stories, that is when I was like, okay, that's obviously a cover-up. That's criminal.
Right.
That is what they told Congress, the same thing.
Right.
As opposed to what I had said to them specifically, as well as to everybody I've talked to about this on a government level, they all know what I said for a fact, because I said it right to their face.
Right.
Excuse me.
Sure.
So I decided to say, you know what? How about I get the documentation of when I testified to Arrow? And that's exactly what I did. And it took them 2 months to get it to me. I had asked it for an email, and I'm thankful. One of the guys that works for Arrow, he's a really good guy. He's made this pretty easy for me. But you know, under Dr. Kirkpatrick's guise, this thing was not suitable. So I had published my memorandum for record, or MFR, on all over the website. I gave it to you, Dr. Greer, as well.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody can see the discrepancies from what the Volume 1 report talks about to what my MFR actually talks about.
Right. Right.
That in itself is a crime. That is a federal crime.
Right. And here's what's happened. So I want to connect that story that you just shared very succinctly to what's been going on for 3 years of my involvement, bringing people up to Capitol Hill. Now, one of the things I did deliberately, Arrow didn't know that a number of these whistleblowers and witnesses were coming through the Disclosure Project network from me to Senate Intelligence and Armed Services, and then from there over to Arrow. The reason I did this instead of going straight to Arrow is that I knew that we needed to have documentation as a check and balance with the people who are honest brokers trying to get to the bottom of this, who are the chief investigators at Senate Intelligence and Armed Services, before this got whitewashed and covered up at Arrow, because I knew they were dirty. I knew that from early on, and corrupted. And so what that did was that, and we can show this in a moment at the on screen, Mazzola, is that there was a letter written from the chair and co-chair of Senate Intelligence Committee, basically reprimanding Arrow and Kirkpatrick for not reporting things back faithfully to the Oversight Committee. And we have that letter. And it was a result of us, not just your case, but multiple other people who had very clear testimony. Some of them were regarding extraterrestrial events and craft, and others, like yours, were not. And they would sanitize it or flip it around and try to either discredit it, or actually, in the case of one man I know, completely sanitized his report. Dr. Kirkpatrick got upset, stormed out of the room. And it was a guy who was based out at the Nellis Air Force Base in Area 51. So I think that one of the problems is that we knew early on that this was going to be a huge issue. We also have, I won't say who, a whole group of whistleblowers who also have evidence independent of this, of criminal activities by Dr. Kirkpatrick in the Arrow office. Now, just so everyone listening understands, the Arrow office and this whole investigation was set up through an act of Congress, literally, to fund an investigation into UFOs, UAPs, and to be set up an office that would be scientific, objective, truthful, and report back to the oversight committees and to the Congress, and in their classified reports, honestly, back to these committees. We now know, and we can prove in a court of law, that that's not the case, and this is why this is being referred to for criminal prosecution with the Department of Justice by my group. So, and I'm saying that here, it's a bit of an explosive statement, but I think that the era when these people can get away with these kind of whitewashings of the truth and spin things, lying to Congress and the American people. Now, it's one thing if they tell a tall tale to the American people, it's unethical. But when you're mandated and funded through a huge millions of dollars to look into this, and then you get a group like ours delivers these kind of whistleblowers and evidence and documents. And by the way, our entire archive, terabytes of information have been provided to the Arrow office. All right. They have it all. 770 whistleblowers. And they've done nothing with it except cover things up. So, and this is a huge problem. We can trace this back from 1953 with the Robertson panel all the way to the current moment, where panels and investigations have been set up by people in Congress wanting to get to the bottom of this, and they've been turned into a cover-up by these criminal elements that are lying to Congress and lying to the President of the United States. This is foundational for the Disclosure Project, because what we have been saying for almost 30 years is that, what has been 30 years, is that these projects related to UFOs are in fact being run unconstitutionally and illegally. And therefore, they can't threaten you or anyone else with a reprimand or arrest or execution for disclosing information, because the underlying program is illegal. See, and this is, we're going to get into this in a little bit after you have to leave. This is foundational for the Disclosure Project. And most people blow right over this point. And that is that every single project, that meaning everyone, whether they're an incidental witness like you, or someone working at the Skunk Works, or someone who is a Delta Force guy at a covert base out west, none of them are bound by their non-disclosure agreements, and they are vitiated because the underlying program they've been working on, although they didn't know it, is in fact a criminal conspiracy. It's RICO, it's Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization. It's be like the mafia, except it's got the authority of masquerading as a valid national security program, using our tax dollars, military weaponry, thuggish behavior like you encountered, threatening to be killed and roughed up. So many people I've worked with and debriefed on this have gone through the same experience you and your buddies did in Indonesia.
Yeah, I remember you telling me when I approached you, you told me exactly how lucky I was to not have been killed. So,
oh, absolutely, unbelievable. And you know the names of these other 5 guys who are with you, who are witnesses. Yeah.
Recent podcast I did with Jesse Michaels, I showed up some messages on 2 of them that had reached out to me. One of which was when you and the Senate Intel guy were trying to basically get him to talk as well, and then he responded on saying, "Hey, it's not worth my life, and it's a risk," and that which we know about. Then I had another guy reach out to me after I did a Shawn Ryan through email and at least through LinkedIn, and then he thanked me for getting the word out. And what are they talking about? If that was the case, as direct reference to it. The only thing I masked out was their names, but they exactly what we're talking about is what we encountered. So, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I think this is why, there are now folks with the Senate Intelligence Committee that have confirmed your story independently. There's the chief liaison to me with a law enforcement entity who has been a special forces senior operator who has confirmed it independently. And it's been confirmed also by Jake Barber and folks he's worked with as being genuine. So the implications of this are huge. I don't want to miss the big picture for the details here. These man-made craft have been around for over 60 years. They're being used in criminal enterprises. They're being made by U.S. taxpayer dollars through illegal misappropriations of black budget and military and intelligence funding. And the crimes that they've been committing run the gamut. And when I say it runs the gamut of the whole federal penal code, murder, kidnapping, torture, embezzlement of federal funds, intimidation of witnesses, lying to Congress, sedition, treason, insubordination to the chain of command of the military, and the threatening of federal officials. There are multiple people I am working with right now who have been intimidated, who are federal employees and investigators. And many of them have been seriously threatened and intimidated by this organization. And it runs the gamut from IRS intimidation, Department of Justice people threatening to have them arrested, the abuse of law enforcement entities, physical intimidation, military helicopters over their house threatening them and their families. In fact, one of the chief investigators for the Senate Intelligence Committee, after I first handed off a cache portfolio of a lot of information and intelligence well over 3 years ago, had that happen where his children and were in the house, and there were these two helicopters right above the roof line threatening him and the family, right out here outside D.C. in the Virginia suburbs. So, this kind of thuggery, and this is what I keep saying to publicly, where is law enforcement? I mean, there is so much information. It's like if I or you did 0.1% of the kind of illegal activities these people have done, we'd be in prison for the rest of our lives. Yes, instead, they go around threatening people like you or these honest investigators who are trying to get to the bottom of it and intimidate them. Or, in the case of at least one or two of them I know of in the last couple of years, kill them. They've been murdered. So, this is a serious issue. And we're hoping that some developments that I shared off camera with you a couple of days ago will lead to this getting reined in fairly, at least in the next year or so.
Absolutely. I hope it does too. And that's the, I know the people you're talking to. I've talked to them as well when we had our meetings in certain places to brief, high up people. And they're good people. It just sucks that they're having to go through the same things you have went through, the same things I've went through, as far as intimidation and things like that. But the thing is, they're obviously more disturbed of the fact that we're actually talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're obviously upset because we're right over the target, and that's how we know we're over the target is because the reactions that we're getting.
Right.
And truth is being told that the light is going to basically turn that darkness inside out, and it's going to reveal everything. And one day soon, and I'm hoping that's what we do, because I'm not going to stop this. I know you're not either, and I know the people that we've been talking to are not going to stop either. Right. It needs to be reeled in. But other than that, Dr. Greer, I've got to run.
Yeah, I understand. Well, it was great. Thank you for your sharing this with everyone. And I wanted to connect some of these dots for the listeners and have them understand, not only the case, but the cover up at Arrow and the other events that have happened that are criminal events surrounding that whole case. Yeah. So I was wanting to get a little bit into the ramifications of what I was bridging his experience and what Arrow was doing to the foundation of the Disclosure Project, legally and constitutionally, and never mind morally, and what I like calling inverse witnesses, right? And it's a term that I started using in the 90s after I briefed the director of the CIA for President Clinton in 93. So that was over 31 years ago. And what followed from that meeting were multiple other meetings I want to just briefly go through in the next 20 minutes or so that prove in any court of law that all these operations are illegal, unconstitutional, and in fact are treasonous. And treason carries a fine, United States of execution. It's a death penalty, potentially. So what I'm looking at here for me personally, and this is my journey for over, 32 years or so now, is finding that there are people who are very senior in government, not just here, but in Australia, in the United Kingdom, in Canada, that I met with, who, if the law was being followed, they would know about this subject. Instead, they know nothing. And not only that, if they begin to drill down on it, no matter how high their rank, prime ministers, presidents, senior generals at the Pentagon, they are threatened physically and also with their careers, or they are blackmailed. They can create either real blackmail based on, improprieties, or the files will be made up and they'll blackmail officials. So this organization, I call it a transnational, a criminal organization, TNCO, because it's not just U.S. and it's not international, it's transnational, globally, operating outside the control of normal national governments. And it's also definitely a criminal organization. But because of the depth and the breadth of what we've researched and people I've interviewed, I mean, a few months ago, I met with someone who personally knows and asked me not to name a well-known prime minister of the United Kingdom, who, when he started looking into this, they threatened to kill his entire family and him and told him to back off. So, this is true thuggery. And you cannot claim you have the rights of national security or top secret clearances, and at the same time break every law in our country or Canada or the United Kingdom or other countries. I'm sure the same thing is going on in France and Italy and wherever. So when you look at that, it needs, what I've been trying to do over the last 3 years, 2 to 3 years, is pivot this over, and I have to be very careful what I'm saying here, but to a very senior compartmented law enforcement investigation that is ongoing and is picking up steam. And I just had a meeting handing off dozens of whistleblowers and files and documents to that team, and they're really moving forward and on a federal level, but they also can operate overseas. And so I think that this is why one of our executive orders that I recommended to the president is one that would fund this operation, not just to investigate, because there's funding for that, but also to get these illegal operations under control. And that means you're going to have to go into all the black sites and facilities and corporations and tell them to stand down what they're doing and then report properly to the Congress and to the president, or in the case of the United Kingdom, the prime minister and their parliament and the King of England, who is technically the head of state. So I think that we're in a real dynamic period right now, but just a quick trip through the people that I have personally briefed. So, I don't troll the internet for this stuff. So these are personal meetings with the CIA director for President Clinton, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, 3-star general, Patrick Hughes. From the 90s to now, the senior people for Senate Intelligence, Armed Services, House Oversight, people on the national security advisors and staff for the presidents, various presidents over the years, people who have been the ministers of defense of Great Britain, Canada, and Australia, all personal meetings, and other folks, some of which have been leaked out, like Admiral Tom Wilson, who is the head of Intelligence Joint Staff. But there are many other people before that meeting, for example, who I had met with back in the 90s all the way to now, who absolutely, if these programs were legal, they would be accessed into them or read into them, but they're not. And so whether it's the president and I just met with a general who says, oh, absolutely, the current president is not read in and doesn't have information on this. We know the oversight committees of the Senate and House don't. And so at that point, this is I keep referring to this, and people think it's a bit of arcane. If you look in our archive, there's something you can show it to the public while I'm speaking. It's called the Unless Otherwise Directed letter, UNOD. And my military advisor back in 97 said, hey, well, look, we've had 4 years of going around to some of the highest officials here in the United States. They don't know anything about this, and yet we can prove these programs are ongoing without oversight and authorization or any legal foundation. So I wrote a letter that was said, unless otherwise directed, it's a military ruse. Unless otherwise directed, our assessment is the following, and we're going to take the following actions. The actions we said we're going to take is that we're going to solicit people who've been in these fake top secret programs, unauthorized top secret programs, and have them come forward with documents or any information up to and including material, physical evidence. And that because these programs are illegal, they cannot be prosecuted. Their non-disclosure agreements or any oaths they signed are vitiated or neutralized, and they cannot be prosecuted either militarily or in the civilian criminal Department of Justice system. Now, the way it was worded is, we're going to give you 60 days to reply. And unless you affirmatively state that these programs are in fact legally being overseen, we're going to proceed. And we're going to start disclosing information from top secret whistleblowers, documents that are still top secret or secret that I have that I published, and that we cannot be penalized legally, nor can the whistleblowers. And you know that from 1997 to now, there's not a single office or official in the entire United States government that has ever said to me that is an incorrect assessment. So that I wanted to let everyone know that is the foundation of the whole disclosure project movement, which we started in the late 90s. And then we did the 2001 National Press Club event and on and on. But I think people need to understand what the foundation is. And it's because, to my astonishment and dismay, as a young doctor, I mean, imagine, like 30, like your age, briefing the CI director, and, he knows nothing. The president knows nothing. And they're being lied to. And then when they start leaning into it, the president is threatened. And so I think that was such an astonishing thing for me to learn, because most people assume these programs that have consumed trillions of dollars, hey, memo to Elon Musk and Doge, you want to see where the real money is? The 100 or 200 billion you're finding is not even a rounding error of what's been embezzled by this organization. It doesn't even arise to 0.0001%. So it's like, let's have a meeting, bro, and with some of your, Doge bros, and I'll say, here's where you need to look if you want to hit pay dirt on the trillions that have been embezzled and are still being embezzled. So I think that, sorry to get agitated about that, but I just, all these things have so much fanfare, and it's like sound and fury signifying almost nothing because they're not looking or doing anything in the right places yet. Now, we're going to put a clock on that. So I'm going to say, I'm not going to say how long. We're going to put a clock on that and see to what extent those efforts really begin to drill down where the corruption is, and also if the Department of Justice and the White House and Congress actually moves in the direction it must go in. Now, there's some developments in the last 2 weeks I can't speak about that would indicate that things are moving in a good direction, right? And my hope is that we'll actually begin to see some real changes with these investigations that are going on. Not what you're hearing about in Congress. I mean, the Congress at this point and the nonsense going on with the people trotting up there telling half-truths, lies, and nonsense. That's not going to go anywhere. But on a level of federal investigation, law enforcement, prosecution, et cetera, there is significant movement because they now realize these programs really are illegal. Basically, what we concluded by 1994, we had concluded these were illegal operations. And now they're going, yeah, they are. And so that's another reason why we're saying a big announcement here. Anyone who has any information on this, corporate, government contractor, military, other government agencies, currently or in the past, you can be fully immunized against all prosecution, no matter what, if you provide full disclosure of everything you know, the people involved, the locations, et cetera. And that is now on the table, operational. I will say that the flip side of it is people who are in those programs or have been in them who do not cooperate can be arrested and charged under RICO, Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization, as a co-conspirator and as having been involved, even if you didn't know the program was illegal. One of the things about RICO, the left hand doesn't have to know what the right hand's doing. So at this point, I'm telling people you need to come forward. There's protection in place. We will provide you direct to the people who can provide that immunization federally against all crimes and also protect you. But it needs to start picking up speed. I'm making a call and a request for more people to step forward because this is how it happens. So it has to be a big network of people, and it can't be 2 or 3 people. It needs to be dozens, if not hundreds of people come forward from all these different facilities, corporations, highly compartmented operations in the government. Now, I'm speaking now of U.S., but it can be overseas U.S., right? So it extends overseas if it's the United States, but there is no similar investigatory or criminal pursuit going on in other countries that I'm aware of. If they're going on, I don't know about them. But other countries are watching, right? You have your Five Eyes countries, they're watching. Canada, Australia, Great Britain, of course, New Zealand, less so, but what they're called the Five Eyes countries that we share intelligence with. So they're watching. But I think that depending on how this goes here, it would have a sort of an elevating effect for interest that's in the European Union, the United Kingdom, and elsewhere, because they're watching this. At least the relationships I have overseas would indicate that they're watching what's going on here in the United States very keenly, and to see what kind of progress we make.
Dr. Greer, what's the relationship between this sort of front-facing effort in Congress? We're going to have hearings. We're going to, pass the disclosure bill. We're going to do et cetera, and this law enforcement effort that you're describing behind the scenes. Are these two totally separate investigations, or are these? Is there some overlap here?
They're separate totally, because having been very intimately involved with both. I'm in a very real way a senior advisor and intelligence source for the national security and federal law enforcement on this. But the congressional effort has gone sideways very badly, only because they don't have any staff who are really drilling down on this full time. And there have been a number of people who have gone up to cover up things like Mr. Herrera just shared, with the Marine group, running into this craft that was man-made. They're going up there saying, we don't have anything that can operate that way. And as I said in the past, one of the main thrusts of a false disclosure, which is unfortunately what's picking up steam in Congress, it'd be a false disclosure, would be to cut out all of that. And that opens the door to, therefore, all things that look like a UAP, UFO event, abductions, mutilations, injuries, they're all blamed on the aliens, right? And that is why that is happening. There's a full court press gaslighting people like Congressman Luna and Burchett and other people I've met with people who are going, oh, well, I've worked in this, and none of that is true, right? Well, it is true. But because they don't know, and they don't have a staff dedicated to doing an in-depth investigation, which is what initially they were supposed to get. But remember, the Senate Intelligence Committee and Armed Services wanted to have a staff of 20, 30 people drilling down on this through our intelligence network at the Disclosure Project and these hundreds of whistleblowers. They didn't do it. They never got the funding. The House asked for House oversight. Those guys wanted a subcommittee, select committee, I should say, that would have subpoena power. That was denied. The amnesty bill that came out of Senate Intelligence Committee, that when I was working with them a year and a half ago, that was cut out of the House reconciliation bill. And then they came up with this harebrained idea, let's set up a panel, a UFO panel. Well, let me tell you how that will conclude before it gets going. It'll be a whitewash redux of the Condon Committee of 69, the Robertson Committee of 53, and the Arrow office that's been going for years, that's been engaging in nothing but the same old, same old. So
what's the definition of insanity? Remind me.
Yeah, doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Now, the problem is when you have all these new people in Congress just looking into this, they don't have the institutional memory, let's call it, of what's happened over the 60 years I just referred to, from 53 to now, well, 70, 71 years, 72 years. So because of that, if you don't know the history, you're going to repeat it and make the same mistakes. But that's another problem, because all these members of Congress are so busy and they have no full-time staff devoted to this issue. So it's very easy for people who go in there who can flash credentials. Oh, I used to work for the Pentagon, like Mr. Elizondo, or I was here, or Chris Mellon, who worked on various national security issues, and say, oh, well, all this stuff. And they're actually perpetuating the myth and the cover up that everything that you're seeing out there is alien or NHI or whatever the current flavor of the month is to call extraterrestrial vehicles and life forms. But I think that is a real problem because, and that's why most people I know who are whistleblowers and witnesses are pivoting away from that and now are moving over towards cooperating with this increasingly, let's just say, muscled up law enforcement investigation. And that I know that there are now several dozen people we have handed over as whistleblowers that are being pursued. But even that operation needs to get further supported. And ultimately, the really criminal activities that are going on at these facilities, they're not going to stop until there is some kind of executive order standing up under law enforcement, a type of team that would go in and take operational control of those facilities and stand those operations down. And if they don't, they're going to continue to shoot ET craft down. They're going to continue to abduct humans. They're going to continue to kill extraterrestrials. When they're captured, they're kept in underground bases, often interrogated and tortured. I'm talking about the non-human. And so, there's a whole, a plethora of huge problems that have to get addressed. And, prosecuting people is only part of it, or investigating it. The other part of it is that how do you get those under control? And that's the other half of what we're working on. But that's going to require some significant funding and authorization to operate properly, unless through the criminal pursuit, that organization capitulates, right? And that could happen and says, okay, we're going to stop in this way. We're going to start a whole new chapter, which is what a lot of people are recommending. And the other thing that I think is going to happen is that the senior officials that are being blackmailed or threatened, the people doing that need to be arrested very quickly. And I don't want to name who they are. I know who they are. There's a couple in the current administration. There are others that are people in legacy programs that would actually like to come forward, but they are being threatened, or they have blackmail files on them, all kinds of illegal activity. So that kind of illegal activity really has to be stopped. And ongoing. I mean, my whole 30-some years of doing this, it's been one, atrocity after another that I observed or experienced, up to and including murder and intimidation and blackmail and theft and hacking and all kinds of stuff. So I think that, that's making progress. I don't think that Congress is configured yet a properly funded select committee with subpoena power to do anything other than a silly dog and pony show. I've been recommending that they do, but every time that tries to go up, last time I met with Congressman Burchett, he said, yeah, that's not going to happen. There are powerful people in here who are part of this conspiracy, frankly, who are in the Congress and in the Senate that keep batting that down. So I think the best you're going to get out of the Congress until the law enforcement and executive branch moves this forward more aggressively is sort of a bunch of half-truths and a dog and pony show of really no great significance. I'm sorry to be so negative about that, but I mean, that's how I see it, having been involved intimately with the people in Congress